Right now, the United States is considering spending $2 billion to make one of its largest dams even bigger. Not to build a new one, but to raise an 80-year-old giant by just 18.5 feet. That single decision could send more water to millions of people, reshape California's agriculture, push an endangered salmon closer to extinction, and permanently flood the last sacred land of an indigenous tribe. This isn't just an engineering project, it's a conflict between agriculture, ecology, and indigenous land. So why do it? And who actually benefits? In this video, we're breaking down the engineering challenge, the real cost, the political fight, and the human story most people never hear. Because by the end, you'll understand exactly what's at stake and decide for yourself if those extra 18.5 feet are worth it. To understand why people are fighting so fiercely over Shasta Dam, you first have to understand what it is and what it took to build it. The story starts not in the 1930s, but in 1919, when engineers first floated the idea of a massive dam on California's Sacramento River to tame its unpredictable floods and feed the vast agricultural ambitions of the Central Valley. For years, the project was a dream too expensive to pursue. Then the Great Depression hit. California tried to sell bonds to fund the dam. Nobody bought them. The project was handed over to the US Bureau of Reclamation, reborn as a federal public works endeavor. And suddenly, thousands of unemployed men began arriving in Shasta County from across the country, camping in cars, living in makeshift towns, doing whatever it took to get a job. In 1938, construction began in earnest. The man put in charge was Frank Crowe, the same engineer who had built Hoover Dam, and arguably the greatest dam builder in American history. He would oversee nearly 5,000 workers, and the scale of what they built is almost incomprehensible. Workers poured 6.27 million cubic yards of concrete, enough to build a sidewalk around the entire circumference of the Earth. The dam sits 602 feet tall. At its base, it is 883 feet thick. Its crest stretches 3,460 feet across the canyon. Engineers rerouted a major railroad and a federal highway over the Pitt River Bridge, built more than 500 feet above the river, one of the tallest combined road and rail bridges at the time. To prevent the enormous concrete mass from cracking as it cured, engineers ran chilled water through a network of pipes embedded inside the dam, a cooling system of extraordinary sophistication for its era. When completed in 1945, 22 months ahead of schedule, Shasta was the second tallest dam in the world, behind only Hoover. Its 487-foot spillway was the largest man-made waterfall on Earth, but none of that explains why people are fighting over it today. Shasta Dam is not simply a wall, it is the backbone of California's water system. Sitting 12 miles north of Redding, it captures water from the Sacramento, Pitt, and McCloud rivers. Its reservoir, Lake Shasta, holds over 4.5 million acre-feet of water, roughly 40% of all water stored across the entire Central Valley project. The federal network of reservoirs and canals that stretches 450 miles from Northern California to Bakersfield in the south. The dam's power plant generates up to 710 megawatts of hydroelectric electricity, enough to power hundreds of thousands of homes. And tucked into the face of the upstream dam wall is one of its most important and least known features, a temperature control device installed in 1997. This massive structure lets operators draw water from different depths within the reservoir, up to 350 feet down, to control the temperature of releases into the Sacramento River. Winter-run Chinook salmon, critically endangered, need water cooler than 56 degrees Fahrenheit to incubate their eggs. Without that temperature control, they die. It is a piece of engineering simultaneously brilliant and deeply humbling. A 602-foot wall of concrete, equipped with a fine-tuned thermostat to keep one species alive. The Central Valley project, anchored by Shasta, annually delivers around 7 million acre-feet of water across 35 of California's counties. It feeds a $60 billion agricultural industry. Almonds, artichokes, avocados, wine grapes, tomatoes, cotton, and more than 250 other varieties of crops. This is not a minor piece of plumbing. It is the circulatory system of American food production. In early 2026, the Trump administration's Interior Department announced $40 million for planning and pre-construction activities associated with raising Shasta Dam, funded through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, signed on Independence Day 2025. The preferred engineering option is an 18.5-foot raise. That might not sound dramatic on a 602-foot dam, but in infrastructure terms it is an enormous undertaking. Here's what it would actually involve from an engineering standpoint, and this is the part I find genuinely fascinating. You can't simply stack concrete on top of an existing dam. The original structure was designed to handle specific loads and water pressures. Raising it means the entire foundation, abutments, and structural body must be re-evaluated for increased hydrostatic pressure, the force of a deeper, heavier reservoir pressing against the wall. The Bureau of Reclamation began core drilling into the existing concrete and bedrock as early as 2018 to assess the condition of an 80-year-old structure. Then there's the seismic problem. A 2019 Bureau of Reclamation analysis, obtained under the Freedom of Information Act, determined that Shasta Dam requires seismic upgrade work before any raise could begin. That work alone couldn't start until 2028, and even then the risks don't disappear. Engineers have modelled 10,000-year and 50,000-year seismic scenarios. Their conclusion: post-tension tendons would need to be installed throughout the structure, and the existing spillway gates may need to be replaced entirely to handle the increased hydrodynamic forces. Downstream, Keswick Dam, which stabilizes the uneven flows released from Shasta, would also need to be raised, and its power station retrofitted for greater peaking releases. But each raise option would require an entirely new powerhouse, built alongside an aging structure on an active seismic zone. The reward for all of this? An additional 634,000 acre-feet of storage, a 14% increase in the reservoir's capacity. The administration says that's enough water to supply 2.5 million people for a year. Critics say that number is wildly optimistic. You can only store water if there's water to store. In California's increasingly volatile climate, Lake Shasta doesn't reliably fill to its current capacity, which raises a bigger question. If the water isn't guaranteed, what exactly are we paying for? Let's talk about the money, because this is where things get murky. The Bureau of Reclamation estimated more than a decade ago that raising the dam would cost nearly $2 billion in today's money. Environmental groups note that with inflation and construction cost increases since, the real figure is almost certainly higher. The $40 million announced in 2026, Gary Mulcahy, government liaison for the Winnemem-Wintu tribe, was blunt. Not even a drop in the bucket. He added, "Throw $40 million away. They do not have the personnel, one way or the other, to even complete a planning process." The primary beneficiary of a dam raise would be Westlands Water District, the nation's largest agricultural water supplier, serving nearly 700 farms on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley. Westlands applauded the 2026 funding announcement, calling it a long-overdue investment in water supply reliability. But this project has been debated, studied, funded, then stalled, and politically weaponized for decades. Congress first directed federal engineers to study raising Shasta in the 1980s, then again in 2004. During the first Trump administration, the Interior Secretary and Commissioner barnstormed the San Joaquin Valley in support, but the required environmental review was never completed. The project was left dangling. Now it's back. And the legal obstacles have not gone away. The California Wild and Scenic Rivers Act explicitly bars any state agency from assisting efforts to expand Shasta Reservoir in ways that would adversely affect the free-flowing condition of the McCloud River or its wild trout fishery. The federal government's position is essentially that federal authority supersedes it. That clash between an assertive federal government and California's assertion of control over its own waterways may ultimately be decided in court. Here is where I need you to slow down and sit with something uncomfortable. When Shasta Dam was completed in 1945, it permanently blocked 187 miles of cold water streams, roughly half the available spawning and rearing habitat in the upper Sacramento River system. That loss was considered acceptable. It was the price of progress. The dam's construction gave us Coleman National Fish Hatchery in 1943, built specifically to offset the destruction of wild salmon habitat, and Livingston Stone Hatchery at the dam's base, established in 1997, the only facility in the world that raises captive winter-run Chinook salmon as a safeguard against extinction. We built a hatchery because we built a dam that made one necessary. Environmental groups and the US Fish and Wildlife Service have strongly challenged the Bureau of Reclamation's claim that a dam raise would benefit salmon. There is a cruel irony here. The temperature control device, that sophisticated, expensive system we installed to keep salmon alive below the dam, was itself a response to the damage the original dam caused. Now we're discussing making the structure larger. How much environmental damage is acceptable in exchange for water security? There's another layer to this story that rarely gets attention. Beneath the surface of Lake Shasta, there is a civilization, or what remains of one. The Winnemem-Wintu people lived along the McCloud River for thousands of years before Europeans arrived. The pre-colonization population of the valley was estimated at around 14,000. By 1900, disease and the violence of settler colonialism had reduced that number to 395. In 1941, the US Congress passed the Central Valley Project Indian Lands Acquisition Act, taking ownership of Winnemem-Wintu homes and lands. When the dam filled and Lake Shasta rose, it swallowed more than 90% of the tribe's historic territory. Sacred sites, burial grounds, the rocks used for coming-of-age ceremonies, a sacred pool, a massacre site at Kabyai Creek. The men who survived returned from World War II, having fought for a country that was simultaneously flooding their homeland, to find their families displaced, their villages gone, their world underwater. The Winnemem-Wintu are not a federally recognized tribe. They are, in the bureaucratic language of federal records, a ghost tribe. They have no formal standing in federal processes. They receive no federal services. Their voices are the quietest in this debate, and yet their loss would be the most complete. If the dam is raised by the proposed extension, the McCloud River reach that remains above water, the last 10% of their ancestral territory, would be inundated. The sacred pool, the teaching rocks, the burial site, everything. We like to think of infrastructure as a solved equation, a matter of cubic yards and tensile strength, but after looking at the seismic risks, the contested water math, and the staggering potential cost of a 2026 build, it's clear that raising Shasta Dam isn't just an engineering challenge. It is a multi-billion-dollar bet on a 19th century solution for a 21st century climate. I'm often asked where I stand on projects like this. The truth is, I'm deeply conflicted. I understand the necessity of water security for the Central Valley. I respect the audacity of the engineers who built this giant. But I am unsettled by a project where the benefits are concentrated in a few hands, while the costs, the ecological loss, and the final inundation of the Winnemem-Wintu's last sacred sites are forced upon those with the least power to resist. When we take the remaining 10% of a people's homeland, we aren't just building a dam, we are finishing a conquest. It leads me to a question that I think defines our era. When we build on this scale, who should get to decide how we weigh a farmer's livelihood against a salmon's survival or a tribe's ancestral soul? Right now, that choice is made by the loudest voices and the most organised lobbyists. I'm not sure that's the version of the future we actually want to build. There is something profoundly human about a dam. You look at a wild river and say, not like this. We will decide how you move. That impulse has built civilizations and fed nations. But water has no politics. It simply fills what it fills and drowns what it drowns. We have built remarkable things, and we have lost remarkable things in the building. The debate over these 18.5 feet of concrete is really just a question we keep asking ourselves, again and again, in different disguises. How much of what already exists are we willing to sacrifice for what we want next? The dam sits there in the Sacramento Canyon, 602 feet of curved concrete, indifferent to our arguments, holding the water back, waiting for us to decide what matters more. If this video gave you something to think about, something you didn't know before, a story you hadn't heard, then this channel is doing exactly what it's meant to do. We cover engineering and construction not as abstract technical subjects, but as profoundly human ones. I'd be honoured to have you join us for the next one. Until then.